I married an orchestra. Please don't tell my girlfriend. I've been awfully quiet on YouTube lately, and I really do apologize for the radio silence. It's been a big year, but I want to try to start putting content out again. And I think this is the best way to get that ball rolling, because I have big news and life updates for you. If you haven't heard any of the following already, you can follow me on Instagram at cello_ben to stay in the loop, by the way. Hint, hint. So, the first thing to mention. The last thing I posted on here was an episode of the Audition Chronicles from over a year ago. And about 2 months later, I got to work on another episode. Or rather, I got to work doing an audition, and I filmed some updates to share with you. But why did I get sidetracked? Well, I got the job. After all the rounds behind the screen and a trial week later on, I was offered the position of Associate Principal Cello of the Jacksonville Symphony last June. It goes to show you that your perceptions of your own auditions can really be way off sometimes. Let's take a look at some footage from after my audition rounds, and you'll see what I mean. Alright, I just finished playing the semis. So, a lot of the excerpt stuff went, I think, very well. But I started with Bach, and it was a tire fire. Alright, so I maintain that I think there was a lot of very tire-fiery stuff in the Bach, but they decided to give me another chance to play in the finals. Anyway, I was ecstatic to get this job, and I enthusiastically accepted the offer, signed the contract, and started looking for an apartment. Meanwhile, though, I had plenty to do. For one thing, I'd spent several wonderful years at New World. In fact, I don't think I would have gotten this job without New World. But I was going to be abruptly leaving without doing my final year there. And that's something that often happens when fellows are offered a job during their fellowship, so they're accustomed to it. But nevertheless, I had to go and clean out my old apartment and move all my stuff into storage, because obviously my replacement was going to have to move in while I was in Massachusetts for about 2 months. I was offered a position in the new Fromm Players at Tanglewood, which is a small group of musicians specifically hired to spend the summer playing contemporary music. I had a blast, and then it was time to move back to Florida, but this time to the other side of the state. After getting settled into my new digs, it was time to get ready for the season. I had already had the privilege of meeting most of the members of the orchestra when I did my trial week last April, and I was excited to see my new colleagues again. Everyone was extremely welcoming, and the music making was great right off the bat, but I was definitely on edge. Now, this isn't because my colleagues don't make me feel comfortable, because they absolutely do. But when I started, my contract stated that I was on probation. It's a very scary thing to see. In this case, what it basically meant was that I was engaged to the orchestra, as I like to put it, working towards tenure, which I lightheartedly consider to be a marriage between a player and an ensemble. Now, this is very standard in full-time American orchestras. When a new player is hired, they'll start their career with the orchestra on a probationary contract. That's so that the decision makers at the orchestra can make sure that you're a good fit before committing to having you on board long-term. And that's what brings me to the subject of this video, tenure. I'm very, very happy to say that I was recently granted tenure by the music director. When he told me, it was an unbelievably happy and relieving moment, just a deep breath out of great, great relief. So, now that the dust has settled a little bit, let's talk about tenure. What it is, why it's important, what the process is like, and how things have changed now that I have it. So, tenure is basically a fancy way of saying job security. The term usually applies to academics, but it's extremely common in the orchestral world too, at least in the US. Simply put, it makes it hard to fire you. Now, That is not to say you get to do whatever you want and never have consequences, of course. You're still expected to perform your best and behave well. You've got to show up early to work, all that good stuff. But what it does mean is that if you're putting in the work and being a nice person, you more than likely have a very solid future with the orchestra. But because it's harder for you to be terminated once you have tenure, orchestras need to be absolutely sure that you're a good fit, that you're doing your part, and that you work well with your new colleagues. So, why do we have tenure when other professions don't have this luxury? I don't have an exact answer, but I think at least part of the reason is because we work in a field built in large part upon subjectivity. That is to say, we're not trying to hit quarterly sales goals or get certain reports on our bosses' desks by the end of the week. Instead, the work output of an orchestral player cannot be accurately measured. Sure, there are some objective aspects like rhythm and intonation, but the beauty of so many stylistic choices can be in the eye of their beholder. And it's important that we be able to experiment with the ways that we engage with this engage in musical expression, so that we can't be fired in a burst of fury because the rest of the orchestra doesn't like the way we phrased something. Now, I don't think that's going to happen here at all. I've got lovely colleagues and lovely bosses, all that stuff. So I'm not worried about that here, but that's, I presume, some of the origin at least of it. But in that respect, it's kind of similar to the academic world. The purpose of tenure in academics is so that professors can have the freedom to research as they please and publish their findings, even if they're about controversial subjects, without having a negative impact on their job security. It can be a double-edged sword in the academic world, but it indeed does have an important purpose. Another reason that I would guess contributes very strongly to the fact that so many orchestras offer a tenure track is the great work that our union does. So let's talk about that. In our case, and probably in most, if not all, other cases of U.S. orchestras that grant tenure, the process is outlined in our collective bargaining agreement, or CBA. The CBA is a document that's drawn up as part of a negotiation and collaboration between the management of the orchestra and the local union. In our case, that's the American Federation of Musicians, Local 444. Unions are crucially important to our field and to so many others, and they do great work to allow us to have excellent working conditions and to let us practice our craft comfortably. They're a critical component of the American labor market and labor markets in other countries as well, and their existence must be respected, cherished, and preserved. Anyway, our CBA contains all kinds of different things. It's probably, I think, over 70 pages long, and it really gets into a lot of detail about different things like what the acceptable temperatures are that we can play in, how many days we're required to get off after a tour, parameters for rehearsal and break timings, all that good stuff. But it also lays out the tenure process in great detail. Now, the tenure process starts pretty simply with you starting the job and being observed by the people on your tenure committee. In our orchestra's case, that's the folks from the audition committee with an alternate standing by in case one of the members from the original committee steps down from the orchestra, which actually did happen in my case. Now, that committee is headed up by the music director, but is also comprised of players from the orchestra. Briefly put, the process is observation, meeting with feedback, observation, meeting with feedback, and decision. Now, there can be a third meeting if deemed necessary, but it does not always happen. And in our organization, this process can be expected to last a little bit over 6 months. Many full-time orchestras have tenure processes that take considerably longer though, so I'm very happy that our orchestra does it quite quickly. Now, not everybody in the world approves of tenure for orchestral musicians. You may see people argue against it online, saying that they think that it incentivizes poor performance. But I'd like to briefly address that by vigorously refuting it, because I didn't want to leave that stone unturned. Nobody works their musical skills up to the level required to get into a full-time orchestra without having a love for what they do. And that love for music and orchestral playing can sustain one far, far beyond their tenure process. And speaking from my own personal experience, now that this process is over, there's a feeling of greater artistic freedom, the ability to worry less about little mistakes here and there, and more about simply trying to make the music, make music the best I can overall. Instead of my work coming from a place of sort of fight or flight fear about my job security, it comes from a place of love for the music, and that makes for much better playing, I think. I feel a sense of full acceptance from the orchestra now, and I know that I have what it takes to be prepared and to be an asset to the group. So I really feel like now that this process is done, I am a better musician in the orchestra. I'm a more artistically round member now that I'm only coming from that place of doing what I love and being intrinsically motivated to practice my craft in that way. But it was a long road to get there, and there was plenty of stress and plenty of repertoire. Now, I'm very grateful for the guidance that I had along the way from mentors and family, and I want to share some of that with you, as well as just some common sense tips, in case you end up in a situation where you are on a tenure track in an orchestra as well. Tip number 1, don't be a jerk. This is good advice not just for the tenure process, but in general. If you happen to be a jerk, please cease being a jerk and work to transform yourself into a kind and cooperative person. Once you've done that, then go ahead and start auditioning. Tip number 2, be tied for the most prepared person on stage. I don't want to say be the most prepared person because that implies that others around you aren't as prepared, but be tied for first place in preparation. Know your part and know what's going on around you too. Work hard before the first rehearsal to get any questions you have answered by researching them, and if necessary, respectfully asking your principal about a specific detail if it's unclear. But be prepared enough so that you could play the full concert at the first rehearsal and do so convincingly and proficiently. Tip number 3, again, don't be a jerk, speaks for itself. Tip number 4, stay focused on blend, intonation, and ensemble. You want to make sure that you're blending in with your section and the orchestra, in dynamics, articulation, vibrato, and of course in intonation. Keep a very acute ear out for all of that. And for ensemble, don't just listen, but keep a really good eye on your principal to mirror what they do. Stay in the same part of the bow and start from the string, so that you're ready to come in when it's time and there's no delay getting your bow to where it needs to be. That last tip was a hallmark of the late great Georgia Flouzanis, the wonderful violinist who was very passionate about this nugget of wisdom. Sadly, she passed away last fall, but her teaching lives on, and she has truly given me some invaluable advice, and I thank her for that. Now, of course, if you are the principal, you want to show leadership to your section and give excellent cues, but without overdoing anything and without micromanaging. Now, crucial thing if you're the principal, keep an eye on the concertmaster. Even if you're not principal, watching the concertmaster is important, but be sure not to overlook watching your principal in that case too. Tip number 5, don't be a jerk. See how important that is? Tip number 6, let mistakes roll off of you to the best of your ability. It's so much easier said than done, but remember that you almost certainly notice way more of your mistakes than others do. Nobody's perfect and everybody makes mistakes. I could detail countless little mistakes that I've made that still stick in my mind, but I guarantee you that very few of them were noticed by anyone besides myself. And even if some of them were, I was still granted tenure, so they were not that huge of a deal in the grand scheme of things. Making mistakes is natural, and it will happen. Work to abut perfection, but don't expect to achieve it. And when you inevitably do mess something up, because we're all humans, work to let the moment pass, because otherwise it can snowball. Now this does take practice, and I'm still working on it myself, but it's an important thing to keep in the back of your mind, and definitely an important thing for me to mention. Now, there's obviously a great deal more minutia that I didn't cover in this video, or else I'd probably be working on the script until I retired. But if you have a question about this or something to add, or if you have some idea of what I can do with my hands while I'm talking, because I feel like I'm doing a lot of this and a lot of this and very interpretive dance here, but I also don't want to just have them sitting down below me while I'm talking. If you can find me a happy medium, leave that in the comments too. But anyway, if you have questions or something to add, comments section. And of course, if you found this video helpful or entertaining, or perhaps if you found me handsome, please leave me a like and subscribe to my channel. I have some ideas for videos I want to produce. See, look, what am I doing with my hands? I have some ideas for videos I want to produce, and now that my stress level is down a good bit, I'm ready to start working on them. And if you're an adult who's not a cellist yet, but you want to become one, check out my cello course for adult beginners. Again, link in the description down below, which has all of the information that you need to get started playing cello. So, with that said, I hope you have a beautiful rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.